Your mortgage lender said you could afford that mortgage, but forgot to mention that you'd be eating top ramen for the next 5 years. This is the real story with Adam and Sherry. I'm Adam Hamalian,
And I'm Sherry Hutchens.
and this is where two real estate brokers in Contra Costa County with 35 years of experience talk about all things real estate. All right, let's talk about it this week. Sherry, what's before we get to our topic of the day, what is going on in the market?
Well, as you know, we've got a lot of buyers, and there are not enough houses for all of them. And we've been writing offers like crazy and not at the moment getting anything accepted.
Yeah, they're actively looking, and it still seems like there are a number of homes that just aren't ready for prime time that we're showing,
Yeah.
but they all got some little blemish on it and something that's hard to for our buyers to get their minds around, and we don't blame them. If you're going to put that much money into it, you better make the right choice, which
And
actually kind of is our topic this week about buyers making good choices.
yeah, I think when interest rates they came down a hair and then they went back up. And when you're paying that kind of interest, people want the right house and they want it in the condition they want it in.
I think that the old adage, which was you should buy as much house as you can because your costs will stay the same as your value goes up,
Mhm.
isn't always true, but I think some of it still makes some sense. But I think that our buyers are being a little bit more discerning. Fortunately, the buyers we're working with are being more discerning than just putting, here, take all my money, which is what we were doing 2 years ago, coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, all my money and no contingencies and my firstborn child.
Yeah.
Giving
Well,
your
at least the name of the firstborn child.
exactly. Yes. So
So
we
one
need,
of the things that we always recommend as course of practice, and it's best practices in our area. I think it's happening mostly for everybody, and that is to get our buyers pre-approved for a loan before they start shopping.
Mhm.
And Sherry, what are some of the reasons why that's a good idea for buyers to get pre-approved for a loan?
So, first of all, I'm at the phase in my career where I can say, back when I got my license, people didn't get pre-approved before they wrote offers. They sat down with their agent. I had an HP calculator that took me a while to figure out how to use, and I did the pre-qualification. Looks like based on what you're telling me, you can afford X amount of house, and we'd go out and look at houses. We'd write up the offer, submit it, and once it got submitted, we'd find a lender and start getting the loan approved. And somewhere along the line, it changed to be pre-approved before you started looking at a house, which was a great thing because we had a lot of things fall out of contract because people weren't approved for, what the agent said they were approved for. So that should give you some perspective
Yeah,
on,
sellers kind of got weary when they were looking at multiple offers and they wanted to know for sure if I select buyer A,
yeah,
will they actually get pre-approved for that loan? And so it fell on the buyer side to go out and, what are their bona fide? Are they really qualified for it and be able to show, hey, I am a strong buyer. Look, here's my pre-approval. They've already seen my tax returns and my W-2s and my pay slips and everything else. And so by doing that, they could be confident in telling the seller, "Hey, I'm ready to go."
yeah, yeah. I had one instance where the buyers told me everything that I needed to know to calculate what I thought they could approve, but they forgot about their student loans. And
Oh,
we got into contract, and I turned them over to my lender, the lender that I worked with. She said, "Yeah, they don't qualify for this, and in fact, they don't qualify for anything."
oh no.
Yeah, it was bad. It was really bad. The seller was so upset. He'd had his house on the market for a long time. It was the perfect house for this couple, but I'm not sure if he ever sold that house. So, anyway, it's always better to do it up front. And when we do our buyer interview, we say that's the first thing, even before we get in the car together and go look at houses. They've got to be pre-approved.
Well, and I think that brings us into reason number two. So reason number one is to write a strong offer, but reason number two is really for the buyer, like in the story you were telling, those poor buyers, they're heartbreak to find out that they couldn't afford any house.
Yeah.
That
Sure.
hopefully that's not the case in most situations, but at least buyers will understand what their budget is, and that the two things that kind of balance each other out is what is your monthly payment? Obviously, a bigger loan, a bigger monthly payment, and then that translates into how much you can borrow and what purchase price you should be looking at. But I think that, sometimes buyers forget to think about, is this a monthly payment that I can live with compared to all my other expenses? And some of that has to do with other debt like student loans or a car, but also, just enjoyment of life. What are other things that you want to do, and how much of your money is going to be tied up in your monthly housing budget?
Yep. So the lenders, should be, and I think most of them do, figure out how much debt you have and how much debt you're going to incur when you buy a house so that you still have money for food and gas and electricity and maybe a vacation here and there. But they also approve you for the maximum amount that you can afford, which may or may not be how much you want to spend. You might want to have a lower monthly payment than what the lender can says that you can afford. And that's fine. I think people are hesitant to tell us what they really can afford because they think we're going to push them into buying more house than they're comfortable with. Not that they can afford, but that they're comfortable with. Don't you see that every so
I,
often?
it feels like it's almost a rule, like it's just a feature of buyers. And like you said, I think that they're a little apprehensive. They want to stay in control of that top end of their budget, so they tell their real estate agents, a slightly lower number. And our experience is more often than not, when they find the house that they really want, and they don't always, this doesn't always happen, but when they find the house they really want and they have to push their budget, they find that extra little bit, whether it's from a 401k or a family gift or some other pocket of money that they had earmarked for, a new car, and they put off doing that, and they're able to bridge the gap to get the house they really like. And
Yep.
in those circumstances, that it's a pleasant surprise, but I always feel a little bit nervous. Like, if you weren't willing to share that with us ahead of time, why are you doing it now? Like, stick with your budget, because I'm
Yeah.
such a, conservative, detailed person on that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I see the joy that they're getting in getting a house that they're going to live in for a long time.
We had
Oh,
that experience a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you remember. Have been looking for a couple for several months. Their number was 1.5 million, and all of a sudden they called us and said, "We really love this house. It's 1.8 million, and it's probably going to get multiple offers." And you and I are like, "Wait a minute, what?" That's $300,000 and maybe more than that. They didn't end up writing an offer on it, but that was how we found out that they could go to 1.8 for the right house. That would have been nice for us to know up front because we may have come across something that was a good fit for them that they would have liked. And didn't show it to them because we didn't know that piece of information. So,
yeah. They that particular buyer, they don't have an urgency to buy, and so they're being patient, and I think it's our job to be respectful of what their budget is. But yeah, if we saw something that was slightly above that budget that checked all their boxes, we would definitely share it with them. I think that, we're talking, there's an old saying called being house poor. And I think that's kind of what we were alluding to a moment ago. It's like, for a buyer, do you want to get into a house and then have that be the only thing you have that's enjoyable? And for a season, I think everybody can live with an older vehicle, maybe
mhm.
not have a grand vacation for a number of years. But if you don't have a route to get out of that, like you anticipate pay increase or other things like that, that can be it's a choice. It may not be a good choice.
Yeah.
Um, what are some of the other monthly expenses that sometimes buyers forget to calculate into their monthly expenses besides just their mortgage?
Well, I think just the basics, food, electricity, water, garbage, insurance, gas, for your car to get to work so you can pay your mortgage. What is something that we maybe
Well, the
don't?
big thing is property taxes.
Yeah.
It-
Oh, property taxes. Yes.
yeah. We had a couple of interesting conversations this last week regarding property taxes, and it it turned out to be good, but there were some questions about some buyers that we helped them buy a house earlier this year, and they got what's known as a supplemental property tax bill. Do you want to explain about what the supplemental property tax bill is?
Yeah, when you're closing escrow, you have some prorated property taxes, especially if you're in the middle of a tax period. And those taxes are assessed and paid based on the seller's tax basis, which oftentimes is much different than the new tax basis. But so later, when the county finally gets around to reassessing, I shouldn't say that way, but the county is about 6 to 9 months behind in reassessing homes because of the way our market's been lately. But when they get around to reassessing the house, they can see the difference in what the buyer should have paid and what they actually paid, and they issue what's called a supplemental tax bill. And it always throws buyers for a loop because they're not expecting it. And in this case, they really weren't expecting it because they are paying impounds, or an escrow account, as the bank refers to it. And that means they pay their taxes every month with their mortgage payment. So even though we say that's closing, you're going to get a supplemental tax bill. When you get it, call us and we'll talk you through it again. It's always a little nerve-wracking when it arrives in the mail.
Yeah. I guess we probably should have prefaced that with how property taxes generally are calculated. And we usually use a kind of shorthand placeholder of 1.25% of the purchase price as your annual property tax bill. And what that looks like is there's a certain 1% is the base property tax in California, and then local jurisdictions will add additional fees things like to cover things like the local library or the schools, or there might be Mello-Roos because it was a new development and they had to build a new firehouse. And so there's a certain percentage of the purchase price added up, and that can range from a fraction of a percentage to up to 1 or 2%. Usually not that high. And then there's another one that's a per parcel. So rather than a percentage of the value of the property, it's $100 per parcel or something like that. And so that gets added up, and together that usually ends up being about 1.1 to 1.25%. And again, it's very property specific, jurisdiction specific. So when a seller is selling a house, they're paying property tax on what their assessed value is, which is close to what their purchase one is, and Prop 13 limits how much that can be advanced. So it's really tied to what they bought plus a little bit of increase each year. But
Yes.
but if it's been in say the seller bought it for 500,000 25 years ago, and now the new transaction is $1 million, essentially the new property tax will be double for the buyer than it was for the seller. And that's how that supplemental tax is, why there's a increase.
Yeah. The
Uh,
other big expense, and that's a fairly new expense these days, is homeowners insurance.
yes, that has been surprising. Well, it's not surprising anymore. I guess it's been a couple years. So
Mhm.
why don't you tell us why has insurance prices been going up in California?
So we had a period before and after the pandemic when we were having really big fires that were doing a lot of damage. In fact, there was one area up in Santa Rosa where it wiped out a subdivision. They rebuilt it, and a couple of years later, it wiped out the same subdivision. And so insurance companies are having to pay out these claims, and they were losing money. And so they decided that they were going to stop writing policies. Some of them were just pulling out of California completely. And, it forced agents and buyers to look for other sources of insurance, or to go with what's called the California Fair Plan, where the state of California helps you with insurance, although I don't think it's a full policy.
No.
And we're starting to see some of those companies, insurance companies, starting to write again, but at outrageous annual fees. I mean, a house on for example, I'm going to kind of quote what it would be. Let's say you've got an $850,000 house. Your annual insurance used to be maybe $1,000, and you'd pay the first year at closing, and then you'd pay it each year after you own the house. We had a buyer who wanted to buy a house in Moraga that backed up to open space. Open space is a prime area for fire in fire season, and the insurance was going to be $7,500 a year for 1 year policy. And they backed away from that house. They're like, I mean, it made them, it was so expensive that it threw out their approval ratios for their loan. So, one of the things that you and I do is have our buyers call their agent before their insurance agent before we write an offer, so they have some idea, one, if the house is insurable, and two, at what cost.
Yeah, it's you might remember that my insurance has been canceled twice in the last 4 or 5 years, and my insurance broker has had to scramble to find us new policies. And we don't have, so there's, when you buy a home, a seller is required to provide a natural hazard disclosure. It's a report that it's generated by state officials about whether you're in an earthquake zone, newsflash, all of California, high fire zone, flood zone, and various other, not just limited to those, but those tend to be the big ones. And I'm not in a high fire zone, but because there's an open space not far from my house, that it's been canceled. And one time I had to get on my roof, and there's a little bit of moss that had been growing in a shadow side of my roof, and I had to get up there and scrub it off before they would insure us. Um, and it's not uncommon for houses to have to trim trees back from the house. It's even rake up wood chips. You can't have wood chips next to the house, anything that might be combustible in order to get the insurance. But even so, there are still some properties, regardless of what you do to the site itself, it's just too close to something else that is going to cause a problem.
Don't you have a fire hydrant right across the street from your
I
house?
do. Yes, I have a fire hydrant right across the street. That's actually a funny story because there's one new build on my street. We live at the end of the cul-de-sac. It's more than a cul-de-sac, and there's one property that had been vacant for the longest time. And about 4 years ago, it was bought and built a new 3,000 square foot house, an over improvement for our neighborhood.
Mhm.
And part of their permit was they had to put in a fire hydrant.
I wonder what that costs.
I don't know, but I was so we have a
Okay.
fire
Yeah,
hydrant directly across from our house. Very happy about that, but hopefully
exactly.
it
That's
never
nice.
gets used. But yeah, these are all factors that go into your insurability. And in fact, that's one of the contingencies when you buy a house is it insurable? And but it's more than, as we were just talking about, as far as it's more than just insurable, but the cost of it. Could you get a policy? Well, sometimes you've got to go all the way down to Lloyd's of London, which is literally a very high expensive. You can almost buy insurance for anything at a certain price.
Yeah.
But the question is, can you afford it, or do you want to pay that to
Yeah.
buy, any particular house? So all these factors go together, I think, when buyers are looking at a house to be able to, what's it going to cost to own this house? It's not just can you buy the purchase price of, let's just say $1 million is a round number, but your monthly fee, it's your mortgage. The big ones are your mortgage, your property tax, and then insurance is becoming more and more relevant, and that can vary a lot from property to property. If your budget's $1 million, your property tax is going to be the same, similar for any $1 million house in our county. It'll vary a little bit, but it's the insurance that will have a big variable.
Yeah, about $11,000 a year property tax on $1 million home.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a lot. And let's not forget how expensive it is to buy groceries with inflation. I mean, this is,
Yeah, but you got to eat no matter where you live.
you do, but you got to figure that in,
Yeah. It's yeah, it all adds up. It's interesting. One of the questions that comes up is solar, and people are trying to put solar on their house to help reduce the cost of utilities. And in theory, you'll recover the cost of installing the solar panels when you sell. Is that just a theory, or do you see that playing out? Does having solar make a difference?
Well, we get calls from potential clients, or people, our clients who own homes saying, I'm thinking about putting solar on my house. Does it increase the value of my home? Not really. Because, and here's why I think that is, and I could be completely wrong, correct me if I am, but we never have somebody say, I want 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and I want this kind of kitchen and that kind of bathroom and this kind of yard. Nobody ever says, and I want solar.
Right. Yeah, I can't think of anybody. I think that it shows up where if they've fallen in love with the house, they'll say, "Oh, it's not what a nice bonus. It
It's
has
nice to
solar."
have. Yep, it's a bonus, but it does not increase your value, not at all. It
No.
is nice to have. Do you have solar?
No.
I don't have solar either, no.
I thought about getting solar. I was exploring it. The break even is something like 7, 8, 9, 10 years before the savings of your utilities. And even then you almost have to have a battery backup. So unless you're at home during the day when the electricity is being produced, most of us are home in the evenings after work. And so the only way that you get to utilize that solar energy is if you've had a battery to retain it. The
Right.
utility companies, PG&E is the prominent one in our area. They don't buy it. They're not excited to buy it back during the day and sell you it in the evening. And even if they do, they're still making a profit off it. Of course, that's their business model.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
did hear something interesting that because so many people are getting solar panels to generate their own electricity, that the cost of electricity for everybody else is going up because PG&E is basically selling less kilowatts.
Wow.
I thought that was interesting.
That doesn't seem right.
I know, absolutely not right.
I
But
think about, when you break even at 9 or 10 years, it used to be that people in California moved about every 7 years. That number is a little higher now. But what's the technology? How's the technology going to change over the next 9 or 10 years?
yeah.
Somehow, someday, going to be putting solar right into the roofing material. I don't know how they would do that, but who
Oh, they're
knows?
already doing that.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, instead of having those things up on your roof and, just having it in the roof. But and maybe not having them wear out as much. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, solar. What else? What other kind of expenses are related to buying a house? I think that's
I think those are the big ones. I mean, we can dive down into more specifics as, like, how old is the HVAC and how old is the roof, but those are more specific to houses as opposed to just kind of general expenses.
yeah, you just
Are
have to
there, besides money, are there other big mistakes that buyers make with not creating besides not having the right budget for themselves and considering all the expenses? What are some other things that buyers maybe trip up when they're shopping?
Well, I think we're at the moment out of this type of market, but there was a period where buyers were not doing inspections. They were just taking the house as is, or relying on the seller's inspections. And that's okay if they've done their inspections with a reputable company. But that's not always the case. But buyers, in 2020, 2021, 22, were feeling like I just have to have a house, so I'm just going to take it as is. And I mean, you and I had a conversation yesterday. Is everything fixable in a home? And yes, absolutely. You can fix anything that's wrong with a house if you have the money to do it. So, but inspections are important. We don't like to see clients waive them, um, because that's how they learn about their house, what's wrong with it, how to use the house, how to live in a house, how often they need to do maintenance, and which of those items, do they need to pay attention to.
It's interesting. You say anything's fixable. We recently sold a house to a couple or a family, and it had two fireplaces. One was part of the original um, house, and the other one was a gas insert in an addition. And they didn't anticipate burning wood anyway. There's other reasons for that, but the chimney was a little bit loose, and so as they were doing their research, they decided to remove the fireplace and patch up the wall and patch up the outside. And while I know that wasn't a surprise that it was doable, I was actually surprised at how inexpensive it was.
Yeah, I was too, actually.
and part of it was the wood siding was a common dimension wood that was the contractor was able to go find some matching material, and they didn't just like I think they wove it in so it wasn't like all the seams still lined up. They were able to continue it across the pattern from the outside, and then they sheetrocked the inside, and fortunately the flooring was new, so they could go get some more of the flooring and match that as well. And it looks amazing for really relatively not. Weren't you surprised about how easy that was for them?
And how quickly she had it done, actually. I mean, I think the fact that the inspector could push that fire or that chimney 4 to 6 inches
Yeah.
when the inspection freaked her out. She was afraid that, something might happen. The kids might be back there and bump into it and the whole thing topples on top of them. So
Well, I
she,
was there, so that was the home inspector. I was there when they had a chimney inspector come out and look at it to see if it was repairable. And when the chimney inspector came down from the roof, his eyes were wide open. He goes, "That is unsafe. You need to take care of it." I've never seen the chimney inspector freak out, and he was freaked out. So,
wow.
yeah, so yeah, our client made a very good choice, and they were able to deal with that pretty quickly. So, I mean, we think about just because something's heavy doesn't necessarily mean that it's expensive. And that, there are some things in a house that are more expensive to take care of, but it's less expensive to do the repair than to maintain and do a repair than wait for a disaster to happen.
Yeah, we just passed the anniversary of the Loma Prieta earthquake a few days ago. And that was a big earthquake, what, 7.2 maybe? That was a shaker.
Yeah.
And that could have brought down that chimney. Something like that could bring down that chimney.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, it's hard to believe that was 25 years ago.
I know, right?
Where were you during Loma Prieta?
So I lived in San Francisco. It was before I was a real estate agent. I was out on California and 10th. It's where I lived. But I worked under one of the two building. I was in one of two buildings that was partially under the old Embarcadero Freeway. And it was south of Market on Folsom and First. And so south of Market was not developed in those days. It was still a little yeah, undeveloped and kind of janky, so to speak. But it really shook that building. And I ran to the front door of our 3-story building, and there was a vacant lot across the street, and there was a huge dust cloud going up, probably 3 stories, just from the earthquake. And our lights were out, and we were right at the entrance to the Bay Bridge. And as you know, the Bay Bridge part of it collapsed. And so traffic came to a stop, and we couldn't get out of our parking lot until 9:30 that night after they
Yikes.
ours. But all the people started pouring off of the bridge because they were on buses or carpooling. I'm not sure. I assume that the people who were in cars stayed with them, but
Oh, you mean walking off the bridge?
they walked off the bridge.
Oh,
People
interesting.
transit buses or other kind of buses. They walked off the bridge and came back into the city. A lot of them ended up in our loading dock because people needed to use the restroom or get some water or just talk to somebody about what had happened. So it was an interesting day and couple of days. How about you? Where were you?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say how young I was. I was still in college, which makes me question. It must not have been 25 years. It must have been 35 years, 89, right?
Maybe, yeah, 89.
Yeah, so
35, yes.
yeah, 35 years. So, and I was at my apartment. We were watching the pregame for the World Series,
Oh, right.
and I was the only one that had an evening class. Everybody, when the party was started, and I was like, oh, I gotta go. And so I was a little bit late getting to class as I drove to class. And as I got to class and I went into the classroom, they said, the class is canceled. And I'm like, what do you mean the class is canceled? Like, well, didn't you feel the earthquake? I'm like, no, I didn't. What earthquake?
Oh, no,
So
you
my
missed it.
friends at the apartment, this is San Luis Obispo, they felt it, and my classmates at school felt it, but because I was in the car, I didn't feel it. One of the advantages or disadvantages of driving a Jeep at the time. So that was just the shocks on my Jeep was, they weren't very sensitive. I was bouncing as I went over the railroad tracks. Who knew?
Funny. I was on the old Dumbarton Bridge one time during a like 4.5, and my car felt like I had a tire blowout.
Oh, interesting.
And then all of a sudden it felt fine. And I didn't realize until later that we'd had an earthquake, and that's what that was. So I guess it depends on the car whether or not you're going to feel it.
Yeah. Well, this has been really interesting. We should maybe have a whole episode on earthquakes and how that affects homes, but I think that we've run our course for today. So buyers, we really encourage you that when you are making a plan to buy a house, that you take into consideration all the expenses of home ownership, particularly the big ones, so that you really are prepared for owning a house and don't have to eat top ramen for 5 years, unless you want to, because that's always a choice.
Yeah, yeah. What did Top Ramen do to you?
Exactly. I lived off top ramen for, probably half of my college career. And the other half I mooched off my roommates.
I love it. All
All
right.
right.
You need a referral to a lender, give us a shout. If you want to talk more about buying houses and what that looks like and feels like, call us.
That sounds great. That is for it for this week with the real story. If you liked our content, be sure to like and subscribe and refer us to your friends and family. We will talk to you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.